Boy, I enjoy all of my guests here on the Clifton Duncan podcast, but today's episode was a particular delight. I had the distinct privilege and pleasure of speaking with the phenomenal Patrick Page. Now, Patrick just so happens to be one of the American theater's most treasured performers. He's been acting for something like 40 years, but who's keeping score, really? And I can't list his whole resume here for you right now, but some highlights of his Broadway career include playing the Grinch in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, playing Scar in The Lion King, playing Norman Osborne in Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. That's the Green Goblin, by the way, for those who are not as geeky as I am. And most recently, he played Hades in the show called Hadestown, the hit musical, which earned him a Tony Award nomination. Not too shabby. And he can currently be seen on HBO's The Gilded Age. And we had a wonderful conversation about Shakespeare and his enduring relevance. And we also talked about how Shakespeare's understanding of human psychology, particularly his understanding of psychopathy and evil, has predates discoveries made centuries later by guys like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. We also talked about the current state of the American theater and the stupidity of cancel culture, which we're told does not exist. This was one of my favorite conversations ever. I know you'll love it too. But first, however you're consuming this podcast, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you prefer to scratch your CDP itch, just make sure to leave a like, a comment, or a review if you're nasty. If you're watching this on YouTube, I would deeply appreciate you if you subscribed. And as always, you can help this show and this community grow by sharing it as much as you possibly can. If you love it, share it with your friends. And if you hate it, of course, as always, share it with your enemies. There are multiple ways to support my work. For a few bucks, you can buy me a protein bar. You can become a paid subscriber to my newsletter. You can support my affiliates and more. All the links will be in the show notes. This concludes my housekeeping. Now, I know that you'll enjoy this incredible conversation with the great Patrick Big Papa Page. It's just Patrick. Patrick, you asked me how I'm doing, and I think we'll start from there. I'm actually doing okay, man. I'm doing really okay, and I feel good for the first time, dare I say, in quite some time. And I appreciate you asking. I appreciate that you are taking time out of your day to come sit with me, and I really, really love that I am getting to introduce you to my wonderful friends and followers. So overall, man, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I haven't done a podcast that had video in a while, so I'm a little self-conscious. I put up this little ring light, and for the listeners or viewers, I guess, we've just been working out the technical aspect of it because I'm hard of hearing. So I have my hearing aids all turned up. I can hear you. I'm excited to see you. I saw you. What was it? How long ago was it that we did Titus Andronicus?
That was I don't even know. Was it like a month ago? Was it 2 months ago? I don't have a calendar in front of me. I just have no idea.
Yeah, so that was really thrilling to be on stage with you again as an actor, even though Aaron and Titus, two really great roles in that play, they don't have much on stage time together. They just have the one moment where Aaron plays the worst practical joke of all time on Titus. But that was really thrilling. And I guess it was your first time back on stage since pandemic.
It really was. And it was such a great it was weird, but it was also, if I'm being candid with you, it was oddly it was anticlimactic and unsatisfying, only because um, as we were working on the play, I found so much that I wanted to explore, and I so loved watching you work through and figure out such a weird play and character. And just, if we're going to talk insider baseball, let's go for it. I thought it was really interesting. I began to see as we were going on that in a way, Aaron, who for those who don't know, Titus Andronicus is one of Shakespeare's early plays, perhaps not his best, but there are some seeds of wonderfulness in it. And when you have a group of smart professionals attacking the play and really digging underneath the hood, you find some really interesting things there. One of the things that I found is that Aaron, even though he is this villain, I think part of his charm and part of his maybe psychopathy, if I might go that far, is that he's able to embody in every scene the deepest desires of the person he's in the scene with. And that adds to his level of seduction and sort of insidiousness, which is really strange. So in that scene with you, he's like, you can have your sons. A lot of sons die in this play if you don't know it. And I offer you that one uh, drop of rain in the desert. And like you said, it's not quite what's going on there, but just the sheer level of joy and wonder in your eyes. I was like, oh, this poor guy.
Well, I've been studying psychopaths since 2005, which was when I played Iago at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C., where you and I also worked together on The Tempest. And I became.
And by the way,
obsessed.
quick note, my fans will love this. So Patrick played Iago, one of Shakespeare's great villains, across from a man named Avery Brooks, who, as many of my fans know, was the star of one of the Star Trek shows. So a little bit of trivia there. Sorry to jump in, but just had to make sure that people, my nerds in the audience, fellow nerds, got that reference. So please continue.
Yeah, and I can tell you a story about that too that I think is fun and interesting. I don't know how much people are interested in our, like you say, our shop talk about acting. We'll get to all other stuff as well. But since we started there, so I played Iago, and the director, Michael Kahn, asked me, do you think he's a psychopath? And I realized I really didn't know much about psychopaths. And I began studying in real depth. I read everything I could find, from the most technical stuff, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and to stuff for a general audience. Great book if people want to read it, called The Sociopath Next Door by Martha Stout. And hundreds of books and videos and interviews with actual psychopaths and psychiatrists and everything in between. And I became obsessed. And since you mentioned it with Aaron, one of the qualities of psychopathy, of many psychopaths, of course, it's a spectrum, is their chameleonic ability to become whoever the person they are with needs them to be, lacking a really strong identity themselves. There's a wonderful book called The Emptied Soul, which is actually a pretty jargony book about psychopathy. But that idea of there sort of being no core or essential self, just a series of masks, whoever the person you were with wants you to be, you can become. And I certainly found that with Iago, whether it's the best friend or the teacher or the lover, or it just the ability to switch, and a kind of instinct for, who do you need me to be at this moment? I'll become that. And you really found that in Aaron. But I really, really empathize with what you're saying about, in such a short period of time, we had 2 weeks on the play only, in such a short period of time on Titus Andronicus, what it really leaves you is just hungry to explore and go deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have to say it was very exciting too, just to, when you're in the presence of someone who actually takes the work seriously, and it's not just you don't just need insurance weeks. It's someone who is really making an effort. And I feel like part of why I'm happy you're here is I get to speak with someone who has a very real respect for acting. And I feel like part of what's been lost in much of maybe popular culture, I don't know, but I think a lot of actors have this self-loathing sort of aspect to them, where like, well, I'm an actor and I, no big deal. But it's like, no, there's a nobility to it, and there's a whole craft behind it, and there's work that goes into it. And there's real skill, and you're using all parts of yourself to bring yourself to this. I mean, for those who don't know Titus Andronicus, you're talking about a character, the title character, who has his daughter violated and his sons are killed and framed. I mean, there's all kinds of brutality and just awful, awful things in the play. And to see any actor, and particularly one like Patrick, dive in for a workshop and try and discover, what is that suffering, and who is this person in the midst of it, and who are they at the end of it, and what is that transformation? How do they bear that suffering, bear that burden? Is a marvelous thing to watch, and it's a reminder of, this is the importance of why we do what we do. We get to see reflections of ourselves and the more grisly aspects of humanity from the safety of our perhaps slightly cramped seat in the theater.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you and I have in common is the curiosity and the willingness to try to understand someone who is very different from us. And that to me is what draws me to acting. So it seems to me there are in some ways two kinds of actors. There's the actor who wishes to bring their own point of view to every piece of material and use the material that the playwright or the filmmaker or whoever has given as an expression of themselves. And of course, that's inevitable to some extent because you only have your own instrument to work with. But then there is the other kind of actor who wants as much as possible to try to understand what it means to be someone other than themselves. And that's what acting is stepping into someone else's psychology, someone else's sensory apparatus, how they see the world. What I always think of as a character is, what does the character see as they walk through the world? Iago or Aaron, as a man like that walks through the world, seeing opportunities for predation. That's what they see as they walk down the street. They're not seeing who needs help. They're not seeing, when they see someone who needs help, it's an opportunity for predation. Right? I'm a predator, and therefore, if someone has fallen, I may pretend to help them, but what I'm really going to do is lift their wallet because I'm for me. That's who I'm standing up for. Iago has a great line. He says, "I've looked upon this world 4 times 7 years, and in all that time, I never met a man who knew how to love himself." And he thinks it's absolutely foolish that everyone is trying to take care of each other, take care of yourself. And he feels that if everyone were to do that, society would thrive, perhaps in a different way, or maybe he doesn't care about society at all, but he just thinks that's the way nature works. Someone else walks through the world, they see a completely different thing. They're seeing something different. And to see from the character's point of view, that's my bottom line as an actor. How can I get to that character's point of view so I believe in that point of view, no matter how different that person may be from whatever Patrick's point of view is? And of course, that has made my personal point of view more and more and more flexible as I hopefully look through many different sets of eyes.
Part of my job as an artist is understanding the world around me, but with all the bias and noise, it's tough to make sense of anything. Enter Ground News. For pennies a month, this amazing aggregator brings you the hottest current events from outlets all over the world, left, right, and center, and emails you every day to shine light on your blind spots, stories you might have missed due to your own biases. You can install their web extension to learn which way a news site leans and download the Ground News app to get your news on the go. I love this service, friends, and I'm happy to provide loyal listeners of the Clifton Duncan podcast 15% off of an already unbeatable price. Head on over to check.ground.news/Clifton Duncan. Again, head to check.ground.news/Clifton Duncan to get 15% off of Ground News. Get yourself a bird's eye view on world events. I think that's why I get so we had the great Zelda Fitchandler as one of our teachers, and she stressed how both curiosity and empathy are two of the cornerstones of acting, and that's sort of the gift of the profession, is you get to learn a little about a lot of things, maybe a lot about some things, and you get to meet interesting people. But I feel part of the excitement of it is just having. I feel like you have to learn humanity and yourself and history in a very intimate way, perhaps more than most people, and you have to interpret it through the lens of a very sort of an unusually sensitive emotional being, and um, it's exciting because like you said, it expands your understanding of the world. But it seems to me like there are a lot of people calling themselves actors, unfortunately, who don't maybe share those same kinds of values. And I wonder, over the span of your career, I guess my next question is, have you seen the sort of level, that's kind of curiosity ebb, or is it sort of the same, or could we use more of it? What's your sense of that?
Well, there's always been a potential misunderstanding about acting, in that if you do it well, it looks like you're not doing anything. And it looks easy. It looks like anybody could do it. And that leads a lot of people who don't wish to put in the time and energy, and perhaps don't have the passion burning about the craft that they need to have in order to put in the time and energy. It leads them to wanting to become actors as a kind of self-display. Uta Hagen's great book was called Respect for Acting. And you mentioned that. I've seen a quote from her where she said, I named the book very precisely. I didn't call it Delight in Acting. I didn't call it expressive acting, but respect for acting as a craft. I watch a violinist pick up a violin, a great violinist, and play something by Mozart or Beethoven, and I know damn well I can't do that. But if I watch Meryl Streep play a naturalistic scene absolutely perfectly, it looks like I can do that until you try. And then, by God, you can't do it like her. And you look at the same words on the page, and it's just not coming out that way. Plus the fact that not only is she natural and seems to be doing nothing, but there are a myriad of interpretive choices that bring you deeper and deeper into the understanding of what it means to be a human being and what the filmmaker or the playwright was expressing. So, yeah, for me, it's a very, very difficult craft. I am not where I want to be as an actor. That's why I keep acting. I often compare acting to golf in that way. I don't golf much, but I did golf for one summer when I was playing Macbeth out in Utah. And we used to go in the morning, this director and I, and play golf in this beautiful course in Cedar City, Utah. And what I noticed is how people could get addicted to it is because you can always take one more stroke off your game. You always think, I can take one more, I can always get better. And so and that's the way I feel about acting. You're doing 8 shows a week. I just did this one-man show off Broadway called All the Devils Are Here. And I'm doing 8 shows a week for 6 months. And I just want to get a little better than last night. Whatever it was, a little easier, a little more fluid, a little more connected. Just easier and easier and easier, which of course is the same thing with golf. Easier, easier, easier. I'm always trying to hit the ball too hard. And that's the same way I am as an actor. I'm always trying to hit the ball too hard.
It's funny you say that, because I began to see in your process working on Titus that it's sort of similar, where I love, like, this. The perfect analogy. I was taking a vacation with a lovely woman in Maui many years ago, and there was this. We went to some gallery on the island, and there was this artist there who did this sketch of a sea lion, and it was so educational because he does the broad strokes and the broad outline. This big, thick. Um, I think maybe he's using a marker or something, the eyes and the nose and the outline. And then he keeps taking ever and ever finer points to shade in, here's the shine on the eyes, here's the eyelashes, here's little tufts of fur, here's little details, to give the picture more dimension. That's sort of how I feel about how I approach things. I look at these big, broad kind of strokes, and then just a piece at a time, I take a more delicate tool and more specific to get more specific and more, I guess, honed down into the kind of detail that I want to create a bigger sort of composite picture.
Yeah, I think I think that's pretty much the way I work as well. I try not to push myself too much at first. I try to take it easier, but there's a part of me that sometimes wants to, uh, you know, find what the height and depth of something is, and then I'll keep pulling back and pulling. But it reminds me of a great story about Picasso. I can't remember now. I'll get it half wrong, but the point will be there, which is, Picasso made those extraordinary line drawings, let's say, of a bull, and it gives the full essence of a bull running in a bullfight, but it's literally 6 lines with a pencil, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's so simple and so vivid. And someone asked him, well, how long does it take you to do that? And he said about 50 years to get to that level of simplicity, which is, of course, Sandy Meisner said about acting, it takes 20 years to become an actor, which in my experience is true. I teach acting, and it's so wonderful. I had a class last night where many of my students made the crucial breakthrough that I always look for in actors. And whether or not one can hold on to that, that's the tricky thing. But then to be able to take what you know and do it consistently in all different kinds of material, in all different conditions, whether you're running it 8 times a week and the challenge is to maintain that over a great number of performances, or whether you're doing a guest spot on a TV show and the challenge is that everybody knows each other and you're coming in for the day and there is no time and they have to shoot your scene in a half hour. There are different challenges. You have to meet them depending on what kind of medium you're in.
Here's a question. You mentioned young actors, and I remember when I was in training, and we had the opportunity to sit in on auditions for prospective students. And I remember the faculty at the time. So this was like the mid to late aughts. Um, and then they were sort of concerned and worried that they were having a more and more difficult time finding young people who have the courage and maybe the appetite and the will to sort of crack themselves open and do all those unpleasant emotional places, or go to those places that actors are asked to go. Have you found that? I mean, I'm someone who lately and maybe this is as since I've crossed the halfway point in my life, because it's so sort of um, in vogue to dump on Gen Z right now, and all the old fogies. We always dump on the people coming up, but I want to think that they're going to be okay, and I want to take a different tack. So, are you observing the same kinds of trends, or are you finding? I think I know the answer, but are you finding that these young people are having more difficulty or more resistance in like delivering themselves to difficult material or living in heightened material, if that makes any sense?
I think my particular studio, I've been teaching 8 years in the studio I teach in New York, but I've taught for over 25 years. I started teaching when I was well, even more than that, I guess. I started teaching when I was about 27 years old, seriously teaching. Um, and what I found over that period of time is that the imaginative work that's necessary is more difficult for them. So let's say you're playing a scene and uh, the character has some experience in his or her past, or refers to a past relationship or something. The As an actor, I need to have fully experience that in an imaginative landscape. I need to know more than know. I need to have experience. I lay down on a bed or a couch and I go through in my imagination the details of that life that that character lived so that I know the character, so that I can speak from the character's point of view. And I think that there is, when I'm teaching, very often all I'm doing is helping them fill in the imaginary details. Simple questions like, where were you right before this scene? Where did you come from? What was the weather? Was the ground wet? Do you need to take your shoes off when you come in the house? What are you going to do when you come into the house? Are you going to take a shower? Just that kind of filling in the imaginary stuff that the playwright hasn't put on the page, but that the actor must know, I think is more difficult for them because they've grown up in a digital world and not had to use their imaginations in the same way. So when I was a boy, there was no digital landscape. There were 3 channels on the television. You watched television for an hour or 2 at night, if you watched it at all. And during the day, you played. And the play was really improvisation. It was imagination. It was, I put on a blue towel around my neck and my brother puts on a yellow towel, and then we do a 6-hour improv of Batman and Robin. And it's all imaginative play. And I think that kind of imagination has to be rebuilt. If it hasn't been built in childhood, it's difficult to build. Another way that it can be built is reading novels. I read and read and read when I was growing up, because when you're reading a novel, your imagination is filling in all of the pictures, and everything around it. Radio was also a great way when you were listening. If I listened to Orson Welles when I was a kid, even though that was somewhat before my time, I was really into Orson Welles and The Shadow and Mercury Theater, and you're listening to Heart of Darkness, but you're filling in all the visuals for yourself. And now, you're online, everything is provided, and the imagination doesn't have to engage itself. And so I really encourage young actors to read novels specifically. I love reading nonfiction too, but specifically read novels. And then just exercise your imagination. It can be such a simple thing. Sit on the subway car, and as you're taking your trip, just close your eyes. And for me, a good one is I'll go into my childhood home when I was 8 years old, open the door, really try to see the handle of the door, go through the door, look to the left, what do you see? Go over, explore. There's a box there. My mom had a jewelry box. Go over, open the jewelry box. You'd be surprised at what you'd find in there. And it really engaged the imagination in that way. And that, I think, is the main challenge for young actors.
Twin Engine coffee is grown in the gorgeous, sunny mountains of Nicaragua, where it's selected, roasted, and packaged before being shipped right to your door. Not only is their bold and aromatic coffee delicious, Twin Engine also employs farmers, tasters, printers, retailers, packers, suppliers, and artists in the local community. Did you know that 99% of the world's coffees are grown in the world's poorest countries? Well, by purchasing Twin Engine coffee, you are not only treating yourself to the best cup of joe around, you are helping these wonderful people to lift themselves out of poverty. Support small business, support the Clifton Duncan podcast, and support the good people of Nicaragua by ordering from twinenginecoffee.com/Clifton Duncan. Again, that is Twin Engine Coffee at twinenginecoffee.com/Clifton Duncan. It's interesting because I've begun calling imagining, the act of imagining, it's really a full body activity when you're fully engaged in it. I remember doing an exercise similar to that. This was in grad school, but it was like memories of home or something. And I remember just going into my grandmother's house in California, in Hayward, California, and just the softness of the carpet and the smell of kerosene from the, like if people really, I think we underestimate so much the power of our imaginations and how they can really come to life. I think that's what really separates the the competent artists from like the truly great artists, in my opinion, is those who are able and willing to deliver themselves to whatever their imagination will allow them to go to. I spent the first year of grad school just hating children because they are the embodiment of everything that we wanted to be. It's like, they're playing a
Yes.
game of tag and it's life and death.
Yeah. Yeah. People are natural actors, but we lose the ability.
Yeah, I think it was David Mamet who said that now we're in an era where we let the machines do our dreaming for us, which I think is a really interesting way to put that. Um, I another question. You mentioned Meisner, you mentioned Uta Hagen. For those who don't know, these are legendary, highly revered American acting teachers, and I've been getting into lately um, the work of Michael Chekhov and his approach. And this is a very personal question because every actor works differently. But um, do you find as you go on, because I know one criticism of myself, which of it's in my acting and my life, which are both linked, obviously, um, is that I live in my head a lot, and we have this sort of what we call the method, the Stanislavski method, which is very deeply analytical, and you're breaking things down, beats and scenes and script analysis, which I think is an important skill. But do you find that and he clashed epically with Michael Chekhov, who's the nephew, obviously, of the great Russian playwright Anton Chekhov, because Michael Chekhov was so much about it's your imagination, live in the imagination and the will and the psyche and the sort of Jungian sort of approach to it, which is interesting. Um, I mean, are you finding in your own approach now that you lean more one way or the other, or sort of you're finding a synthesis of both approaches?
I use whatever tools I can. I always start with what's the character doing, because it's a tricky thing when you get a script. It looks like words on a page. It looks like language, and it's not. No more than the blueprint of a cathedral is a cathedral. So the language on the page represents a series of actions of something a character is doing, usually trying to get from another human being, usually trying to influence another human being in a certain way, but not always, but usually. And so to translate it into those actions, that's always my first thing. That's what was driving me crazy with Titus Andronicus, because of course it's a play so early for Shakespeare where the language is sometimes what the character is doing. And a person in real life would not be saying these words. You would not, if you found your daughter with her tongue cut out and her hands cut off, say what Titus says. So you make a kind of leap to this is what he's experiencing. This is that sort of everything that's might run through a person's mind in the second before you called 911, but it's not what he would really do. And you have to find the reality of that. And that is super challenging in a play like that. But it's always trying to know what play you're in, because and Titus Andronicus, Shakespeare's a different playwright than he was in King Lear. And to try to find out, okay, how does this writer, this young 27, 26-year-old who's competing with another 26, 27-year-old Christopher Marlowe, who writes these brilliant, bloody, massive plays, how's this writer writing? And to try to serve that, because finally, really, as an actor, that's what I am. I'm a servant of the playwright. I'm his. It's not about me. What's great is if you're working with someone like Shakespeare or any great writer, usually, their intellect towers over my own. And so they express things that I have perhaps apprehended but not comprehended. I realize I know the things Shakespeare is writing about when I speak them. I have a kind of, yes, that's true. That is true. But I hadn't yet come to an understanding of it or found the words for it. And so when I'm in service of the play, when I get to be in a Shakespeare play, it's as if I had that idea, but I didn't have that idea. But I get to express it. It's wonderful.
So I love that you mentioned, Shakespeare. We've been dancing around this conversation, and I jotted down great writer, and there's the beef, not beef, but the Shakespeare Marlowe feud, obviously. But I guess my next question for you, and of course you're an ideal person to answer this. I've lately in my I've wanted to become more of an ambassador for the arts in a way, and I am someone who has very much beaten that drum of I am classically trained and this is important, and people can view it as pretentious or not or whatever, but I find that for whatever reason when I look at when I revisit, I have my copy of Othello sitting over here, and I open it up and I just dive into that language, and I'm so blown away by not only the skill with which the language is arranged, and not only with the sort of imagery and metaphor, and but there's also the sort of depth of psychology. There's all these sort of little nuggets of wisdom sprinkled throughout his play. So I guess the question I'm getting at is, even given all that, I mean, what is it? Why the hell do we still care about Shakespeare? These plays are hundreds of years old. What is it that why do these plays still matter? What's the big deal about him? And what is it that separates someone like Shakespeare from a Marlowe or from his contemporaries or from any other writer who came before or after him? I'll give you the floor and just shut up and listen and let you untie that knot.
Well, it was his curiosity and understanding about human beings. The question that Shakespeare's asking in every play is, what makes us human? Why are we human? What is that? And what is consciousness? What separates a human being from an animal? Is it our ability to know that we exist? Is it, if so, are you still human when you lose that capacity? He becomes virtually obsessed with madness halfway through his career because of that. When someone loses their mind, are they still human? Well, yes, they are. So therefore, that kind of self-awareness, the ability to understand the empirical situation around you and understand who you are, that's not quite what makes you human. And he looks at it in all of its variety, human beings, humanity, from the dark to the light. I think he must have set himself some kind of task in Othello to write from the very darkest point to the lightest point, because there is no darker character in Shakespeare than Iago, and there is no lighter character than Desdemona. Desdemona, he somehow manages in Desdemona to create a person who is wholly good and yet make her real. We believe she's a real human being. And he creates a person in Iago who is wholly bad and yet a real human being. And he seems to have done that not only through imagination, but through observation. He must have met a psychopath like Iago in real life, because we did not know really the indicators for psychopathy until the Hare psychopathy checklist, which is the main diagnostic tool now used to identify psychopaths, was not created until 1972. And yet, when you read Othello, there are 20 checkpoints for psychopathy in the Hare psychopathy checklist. There's someone like Ted Bundy who scores the very highest on that checklist. It's scored between, each of them has 2 points in there. So the highest score would be 40. Somebody like Ted Bundy scores it a 37 or a 38. As someone else like Jeffrey Dahmer might be on the psychopathy scale, but he might only score a 25 or a 26 because he might have some remorse, he might have some empathy or whatever. Iago has none. Bundy had none. And then there are things about, not only about what the person experiences, but also what they have done, indicators of whether there's, let's say, been animal abuse in the childhood. Iago has a line where he says, "Drown thyself, drown cats and blind puppies." Now you might say, well, that's a coincidence. No one else in Shakespeare says anything like that, ever. Iago just has it in his toolkit. He has an experience of drowning cats and blind puppies. It's one of the things on the checklist. And just time and time again, Iago scores something like a 37 or a 38 on a checklist that was made in 1972. So what I'm saying by that is Shakespeare must have observed this in nature. He didn't just make it up. And then he wrote it down. In the same way in King Lear, for example, Lear shows all the indications of what we now know is dementia, very specific dementia called Lewy body dementia. That's a dementia that hasn't been well understood for centuries, but Shakespeare must have observed it and put those qualities into King Lear. So he predates Freud, he predates Jung. He knows human psychology better than anyone. And when you're speaking of Jung and archetypes, The Tempest, which we've done together, is a play which is all based in what we now call Jungian archetypes. Caliban and Ariel being aspects of Prospero's psyche, Caliban being that which is of the flesh, of the body, what the body wants. You know, one of the first things Caliban says is, you know, I have to go eat my dinner. He wants to eat, he wants to fuck, he wants to be free. That's what the body wants, you know, and Ariel's pulling a different direction. And these are aspects of Prospero's personality that he has to integrate. I always think it's a bit sad when someone gives a colonial reading to The Tempest, because it diminishes the play to such an extent, and it absolutely makes nonsense of what Prospero does at the end of the play, which is say to Caliban, "Oh, all right, now it's cool between us, but now what you do next is go and clean my room and trim it handsomely." But what if you take it in an archetypal sense, that is the proper role for the body, to be the servant of the spirit, to clean the room, go do this, I'll treat you well, because Prospero's abused the body. He's been beating him, he's been chaining him up. So Prospero has abused that aspect of himself. And what else does the body want? Of course, the body wants to get drunk, you know, it wants to abuse alcohol. And that's, Caliban just can't get enough of the celestial liquor, you know. And it makes perfect sense if Prospero's now integrated his, you know, for lack of a better term, bestial and spiritual qualities. He's integrated them and put them in their proper places. And the proper place for Caliban is, yes, I love you. Prospero would say, yes, I love you. I love you, and I will care for you, and I won't abuse you. And the proper role for you is to be my servant, not because he's an islander. That has nothing to do with it. It's not a real island. He's an aspect of Prospero's personality. I don't think Shakespeare was concerned with the colonial aspect of it at all. But that's my take on
Well, it's interesting because I remember in initially in preparing for it, I looked at Caliban as an abandoned child in a way, and given everything you've just said, I think it's really interesting that what aspects of Prospero, of himself has he abandoned and has he abused?
it.
Um,
Yes.
but it's so interesting because I often say, like, if people knew the sort of work and thought that actually goes into really good acting, I think the world would be better off because there'd be way fewer actors, and
Well,
things would
that's
have like.
true. I mean, and if you take this thought that I'm expressing and that I believe, which I don't need anyone else to believe, I'm just telling you this is what I read and play, um, then Caliban trying to rape uh, Miranda is a real problem because here's Prospero on this island, and his daughter is now becoming a woman, and he hasn't seen a woman in 14 or 15, 16, 17 years. And so, whatever urges he may have, conscious or unconscious, toward his own daughter, scare the fuck out of him. And he needs, and that repressed sexual instinct is part of what's driving the violence toward his brother. And as you look around the world, you can see that the repression of the sexual instinct is at the heart of so much violence. You look at the jihadi movement, and so much of it is sexual repression that then has to come out somewhere. Um,
There's also this element of attacking sex and sexuality. Um, I think partly because it's one of the deepest and most vulnerable aspects of ourselves. You mentioned jihadis. I thought about the horrors in Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where sexual assault with weapons, bayonets, bottles are used as a method of war. War over land, war over resources, and and then even here in the States, I've sort of sat back and observed. There's been a bunch of weird online controversies, and for one, like there was one in December where there were a bunch of Christian conservatives online who were freaking out about the lamest swimsuit calendar you've ever seen. And you saw all these sort of traditionalist takes about, I mean, these are women wearing aprons or whatever, and it's like, I can't believe she's showing her ankles. And then at the same time, a few months later, there was a video game that came out called Stellar Blade. And then you had these progressives who were coming out and saying, well, the main character in this video game is too overtly sexualized.
yeah,
And so I'm thinking to myself, man, I mean, and again, there's that curiosity, right? And you're observing life. And I remember in my prior relationship, I learned that women have a different relationship to the concept of safety than men do. And now I'm looking at them saying, like, dude, are we just making it? I can't. The reaction against women and female sexuality and just that sexual power and this sort of overarching need everyone feels to kind of control it for their own sort of moral purposes, I find really, really fascinating. Gives me like sort of another dimension of empathy. I'm like, I don't know if I could make it. um I'd rather be an ugly man than a pretty woman, I guess, living in my life. I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, that doesn't end well, and as you say, it now comes from the left and the right. Years ago, I saw something recently about some people getting upset. I didn't pay much attention to it, so I don't know the details, but some people in some school district getting upset about the Michelangelo's statue of David being shown to children. Now, 15 or 20 years ago, if I saw that headline, I could reliably expect that to come from the right. But now I don't know anymore. Now that could just as easily have come from the left. And so it's a very confusing world.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't want to. I think there's in my conversations with people in this time, and I mean, I've had people that we were working with on Titus, and just my own sort of friends and colleagues. Um, there are a lot of people who are tired of this sort of back and forth and this sort of bickering, and I think a lot of people are really shocked that people on, I guess their side of the aisle, so to speak, have become just, I mean, I say all the time that a lot of these folks to me feel like the sort of left-wing version of the evangelicals we used to make fun of during the Bush years.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like, like no one's cool anymore. Everyone's so uptight about so much stuff now. On one side, they're uptight about religion or other things. On the other side, there's a new set of taboos, a new religion that we're uptight about for social justice reasons or whatever they try to say. And it feels like people are saying, no, I just want to be a normal person. Where do I go? And now I feel like in a lot of the arts, a lot of our cultural institutions, and it's been a recurring theme on my channel is, I think that a lot of people feel like they're sort of in a straitjacket in a way, and they can't really express themselves. It's not like they're going out and saying that, gas the Jews or something like that. They're saying like basic things, and feeling like they're suffering recriminations from it. So I don't I people say the pendulum will swing back, and in the conversations I've been having with people, like yourself included, they tell me that the maybe some of the fog is breaking, some of the madness is sort of breaking, and things are shifting. But I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, are you seeing anything on the ground that indicates that the winds are shifting? I mean, I think so, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so, and I'm not sure. I'm with you there. I and what I've noticed in terms of world events and things is that I'm frequently surprised, and so that gives me humility. I would never, for example, have expected the day after October 7th for people to be in the streets protesting against the country that was attacked before they had taken a single measure in self-defense. For that, that astonished me, and not one or two people. I'm talking thousands of people at protests. I I did not know that that existed, and so I am learning. Um, and it is not mistaken to say that I think there is a feeling that speech, which is out of whatever tribal group you're in, is not welcome. So if you're in the tribal group of the right and you say something that's outside that, you're not welcome there. If you're in the tribal group of the left, which is the world of the arts primarily that I swim in, and you say something that's unorthodox or that doesn't follow the mainstream narrative, that is unwelcome, and that the implied price for unwelcome speech is not being invited to the party, whatever that party is, whether it's an invitation to play or you know, and I think that that's not a good environment for art to be made in, because art always questions. That's the nature of art, you know. Say, well, what about, could you see it this way? And if you can't raise a question, then you're not creating a healthy environment for art, for creation. Um,
I've been saying this for a while, and for me, it's interesting because the Israel Palestine issue is something that I have stayed out of pretty much my entire life, and perhaps it's cowardice, but a primary reason is because um, I see just how I see, and I think I understand just why people are so deeply entrenched emotionally on the issue. But like you, I was stunned by the reaction to 10/7 on both sides of the aisle, and I like you have also observed that there's an Overton window that you can only open it but so much on either side of the issue. And when it pertains to, and it was funny because I had these mocking tweets where, like, there was one young woman, for instance, who said that she was hearing about friends being dropped from projects because they expressed their views on that particular conflict, and I was just like, "Oh, really? You don't say? People are being banned from show business for airing their opinions? How long has this been happening? Please tell me what's been going on." And I saw some abhorrent things said that I did not agree with at all, on both sides of the aisle, really. But at the same time, I'm someone who says I don't feel like people should be losing out on jobs, and maybe, I mean, are we maybe in a place where we have to kind of accept that we're in a reality now where people can air, we have more access now to people's opinions, and is the solution to say you can't work here, or you can't be a functioning member of society, or is it to say that I disagree, but here is why I think you're wrong? Because I have friends on both sides of the issue who are very smart, and you can see who is actually trying to get to the truth and help to enlighten us, and who was just being sensationalist. And unfortunately, the former party is very, very rare. um,
It's
but
so silly. It's just so silly. I mean, why would you not want to work with someone based on an opinion they hold? And that goes back to Shakespeare's question: what is a human being? Are we our opinions and beliefs? No. If you are hurtful, if you're taking harmful actions toward someone in the workplace, or perhaps even outside the workplace, that that might be something that would concern me. But you have an opinion, and your opinion differs from mine, and therefore I won't work. That's just silly.
Well, part of the problem, though, that I think we're experiencing now is there's a huge asymmetry here. And that asymmetry lies on, for me, I can say this is a different political opinion than my own. I don't share it, but look, this person is a genius at Shakespeare, or they can harmonize with me, and we have a wonderful chemistry on stage or screen, and I really don't care about any of the other stuff because we're here to make a play. But the asymmetry is in that there are people now who say, if you, for instance, speak up about certain biological realities, let's just say, um, they deem your voicing of that reality as harmful, as dangerous. There was an actor that we both know who's highly regarded who said, this kind of language, it leads to dehumanization and othering, and it's dangerous, and you're erasing other people's identities, and therefore that should not be tolerated, because your language, and which by extension means your very thought process, is leading to the deaths of other people. And so then when you operate from that framework, then people can say, legitimately, from their point of view, this person has a different view on, I guess, sex and gender, and that view makes them dangerous to people like me, and I feel unsafe, therefore that person should not be allowed to have a career. I think that's what the problem is you don't know, like, the grounds are shifting, and what we all knew 5 minutes ago becomes suddenly taboo, and and it doesn't really go the other. Like, I can't say to somebody else, well, I think your views on this particular issue, let's say, I don't know, on race or whatever, are dangerous to somebody like me. Don't work. You can't have a job. Like, I can't do that, but others have the ability to do that, and that's where the disconnect is, because it goes beyond a mere disagreement, and people understand that, which is why I think they censor themselves, because they don't want to get, we're artists, we're sensitive, we don't want to be seen as bad people, and obviously in entertainment, relationships are so important, and reputation is very important. So, if you have the stink of you're an ist or a phobe or something, even as unwarranted as it probably is, um, then that creates problems. And I think that's been a major issue in the industry, especially over the past 10 years.
I agree. Um, and I think that's why critical thinking is so important, because even when you laid out sort of, and I think accurately, um, the the what would have to be called the progression of thought, which is you believe this, that line of thinking is dangerous to me, and therefore I feel unsafe around you. Therefore, I cannot work around you. If you just break that down critically, you realize there's a step missing in there, which is, okay, you believe this thing. That thing it erases my identity or makes me feel unsafe. Therefore, I am unsafe in your presence. That there's actually a space between there. That I'm not unsafe in your presence. Even if I believe, let's say I believe something racist about you, unless I act on it, unless in the room, I might think I might be. Who was the guy from Harvard who was like, I've forgotten his name right now. He used to be president of Harvard. He had to leave Harvard because he did some research on IQ in races, and just the research itself got him fired. Okay, whatever. It was probably bogus research. Your probably IQ is probably higher than mine. It has nothing to do with race, but this was his thing. I'm not. If he believes that, that's just him believing something stupid. Why can't I be in a room if I believe something that's I think, okay, they believe something bogus. I could be in the room with, look, some of the best people I know in the world are Mormons. I lived in Utah for 6 years. I always thought Mormonism was crazy. The idea of some of the ideas in Mormonism, I thought were just crazy. I don't have to believe the same thing in the room. Even if they believe that I'm not going to heaven. Is that dangerous to me that they believe I'm not going to heaven? No, they can believe that. I don't believe that. I don't understand how someone's belief, if it doesn't come in to the workspace, it just seems to me there's a logical fallacy in that direction of thought.
Well, I think part of the problem, and this goes back to, I have this joke where I say, we have to make artists liberal again. There's a strain, I think, of radicalism where I think part of it, they weaponize our natural empathy in a way, and they say, well, if you hold these opinions, if you use this language, if you share these ideas, then you are harming Black bodies, you are leading to the deaths of trans individuals and these kinds of things. So these disagreements are then presented as literally dangerous, and I think that I don't think that sort of awareness has sunken in for a lot of people. They don't see what's going on. They might label you a conspiracy theorist, and I think of it as like, well, no, it's like if there's another organized religion or something, and you're sort of criticizing different aspects of its doctrine. That's essentially what it is. It has nothing to do with your particular feelings about a particular person or a demographic. It's just it's saying, no, I don't share this belief system, and here's my system of logic that I came to the conclusion that I need to reject this belief system. But that implies a chain of critical thought that I think is sadly missing, and I think unfortunately the industry is struggling mightily because of it.
Well, and also you just have to ask yourself what works best. Are we? I mean, look, a lot of what we're talking about, there's a great deal of good that comes from, movements of progressive movements in particular, that may also, you may have disadvantages, you may have advantages. I mean, certainly the way the arts community has opened up over the last, in my lifetime, to all kinds of people, inviting all kinds of people in. That's a good thing, man. That is fantastic to have the entire spectrum of humanity, not only on the stage, but in the director's chair, in the producer's office, in the designers, at the designer's table, and so on. That is fantastic. So it's really always just a question of balance, isn't it? Like, where can we have that appetite for diversity and openness, and then can we eliminate from that the atmosphere of fear or repression, so that diversity includes diversity of opinion and diversity of thought.
Well, I think part of the issue with that I find with identity politics in particular is that it I think it keeps us focused on these very superficial aspects. For one, you mentioned, I guess I'll push back a little bit because, for me in my lifetime, in my lifespan, I mean, I did my first play when I was 16. It was Bye Bye Birdie, and I got to punch out the rock star. This is high school, and then I managed to fool my way into an undergraduate theater program. And then right from the beginning, I had people who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And this was years before we had all these initiatives um, to put people I guess, rules and sort of bureaucratic processes in place um, from a top-down perspective to enforce this idea that you have to have these kinds of people, in your as a part of your company or your organization. And I guess the point that I'm getting at was that I'm not sure that things were, excuse me, necessarily broken. And and I did grow up in the generation that I got to watch guys like Denzel and Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Jackson, or in the theater, Ruben Santiago Hudson, Audra McDonald, Keith David, Tanya Pinkins, all kinds of great people that really blazed a trail, I think. To say nothing of the ones that came before, Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Sammy Davis Jr., even Burt Williams, the great comedian. So I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of these people, but there's a lot of folks who I think for the sake of their, I'll call it a crusade. I don't want to denigrate it in that way, but they talk about lived experience, but then they ignore the lived experience people like myself who, people have been supporting for the entire way. So to say that everyone is racist and has an issue, or that there was some great movement that needed to happen, I'm not sure about that. And at the same time, I feel torn because I know I benefited from people deliberately making the choice to say, we're going to open this up and we're going to cast these different kinds of people. That's a different thing, I think, from saying we are going to bully you into changing the structure of your organization to meet these demands. Like there was a natural organic process that was happening and that had already happened, I think. And I think people have stepped in to accelerate that process, and you understand why they did it. But I think it's sort of backfired in a way, in creating more division. And the irony is that we talk about diversity and openness and inclusion and people who all sort of look different, but it's people who look different but who all think the same. You'll never see someone working at the Public who, wearing a Clarence Thomas T-shirt or something, a Black person or whatever. You'll never see uh, I don't know. I mean, but you know what I'm getting at. You'll never see someone walking into rehearsals at Lincoln Center with their MAGA hat on.
Yes, and
they risk getting assaulted.
We're much poorer for that. We don't have the fact. For example, I'm always looking for great scenes in my acting class, and some of the best scenes for actors are written by David Mamet. And David Mamet's been essentially canceled in the theater community for political opinions that he held or expressed. And that's just silly. He's a great writer. And there's this trick that goes on where everyone who used to say he was a great writer, or a great many of them, now say he's a terrible writer. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So, I have to have humility about it. and try to listen to everybody's opinion. Um, and if your opinion is not in the room because someone disagrees with something you've said on Twitter, then that makes our room less interesting. It makes our room less complicated. It makes our room less nuanced, less diverse. And frankly, if you're just making theater for half of the country, you're not really making theater. If so many people feel I can't go to plays because I know the minute I go to that play, I'm going to somehow be judged or humiliated from the stage, they're not going to come, and that's not what you want. That is not what you want. And going back to Shakespeare, that's what's so wonderful about Shakespeare's plays. There's absolutely no way, if you read Julius Caesar, maybe the most political play ever written, there is no way to tell from that play whether Shakespeare is pro-Caesar or anti-Caesar, whether he would vote Tory or whether he would vote Labor, whether he would vote Democratic or whether he would vote Republican. You simply can't tell because he's looking at life in its fullness. Now, directors on all sides of the aisle or critics will take the play and bend it to their will, but Shakespeare doesn't. You just can't tell. And that's a real challenge for modern playwrights. You go into a modern play and you'll know within 10 minutes which way they vote, you know. And well, I'd like to be kept more in the dark about that.
Well, that's one of the things I love about Shakespeare is that, you know, he never, you know, even Macbeth in his darkest moments says, you know, I don't have any friends and people don't like me. You know, you still have this sort of, you know, empathy for him. But, you know, I laughed when you mentioned Julius Caesar because I shit you not. But I just, I began rereading Julius Caesar just the other day. And part of the reason is that I thought about that production at the Public that they did in the park some years ago of Julius Caesar. And I've been thinking about just sort of making a Twitter post about it because I thought it was a real missed opportunity for a lot of people. And, you know, I remember the day showing up to the show, you know, there were a few protesters that were outside holding up signs, and they were pro-Trump people. And it was sort of a fun New York banter back and forth. People were talking trash, and they were, you know, it was just lighthearted, and people were like, okay, you know, you hold up your sign, buddy, we're gonna go to the show. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then, you know, I'm inside the theater, and we do the show, and I forgot at what point that we stopped. And of course, all the right-wing media, right, they jumped on this image of this facsimile of Donald Trump being assassinated. And I was there one of the nights where the show was disrupted by protesters, Laura Loomer version 1.0 before all the surgery. And you know, CNN is ISIS and these kinds of things, and they were booed out of the theater. And what I wish is that they could have stayed or been allowed to stay somehow and watch the rest of the show, because I do think that some of the choices made in that show cheapened the characters, because reading the play, as I have been, it goes back to all the great Shakespeare, you know, depth of psychology. He's not really telling you this, you know, I'm putting myself in the shoes of a Cassius, in the shoes of a Casca, you know, and the conspirators, where they're coming from. But what that production really captured, which none of the right-wing media, none of these conservative media got, all they got was their images of, look, here's our president being stabbed to death, was that in the wake of Caesar's death and assassination, the state descended into this fascist dictatorship that was, and Oscar's production was so terrifying. There were machine guns on stage. You see Cinna the poet, who, you know, I mean, they're literally presiding over a kill list, people, in these scenes, and they're killing people with mistaken identity. I mean, it's everything is worse after Caesar dies. And I think it's really interesting that on one side, there was a potential conversation and connection that was lost in terms of people staying afterward and having a conversation about, okay, we see this great this figure that we see as a great evil, and now we're doing everything we can for what we think is the good of the people, the good of the republic. And maybe we have our own motivations, and we all have our own ambitions personally, but someone like Brutus is like, I'm doing this. He's too dangerous. He's ambitious. He cannot be allowed to have power. And then once he gets his wish, everything gets worse after that. And I feel like there's a lesson there, perhaps, that if maybe some of our colleagues had more self-awareness, they themselves could have learned. So it's just, I say all of that just because you mentioned, I can't believe that we had this brainwave. You mentioned Julius Caesar. I was thinking of that story. Then you mentioned Julius Caesar, and I just happened to
Yeah,
be revisiting that play.
it's such a good point about that play. And don't forget, of course, that Shakespeare's writing for a monarch. Elizabeth is still on the throne when he's writing Julius Caesar, and it was before King James. And she was quite sensitive. There had been a number of assassination attempts on Elizabeth. She was quite sensitive to assassination. So to write a pro-assassination play would have been probably not made it past the censors. But in addition to that, it is what happened. It's history. That is what happened in Rome after the assassination of Caesar. It led to a reign of Caesars. It didn't lead to a republic. And I know that Oscar Eustis intended it as a kind of warning to the left about their rabid desire to see Trump destroyed. But of course, the imagery was so strong of a Trump-like figure being stabbed that's what people took away from it. It's so interesting when you talk about Brutus there, because Shakespeare has, this is to do with Shakespeare's psychology and the brilliance of it. I talked about how he prefigured Jung and Freud. One of the things that the psychologists in the early 20th, late 19th century, that they codified was the idea of the unconscious, that we are driven by unconscious drives. We don't know what we're doing. We think we know, but we're actually doing what we're doing for reasons other than our stated reasons. And those reasons have, in Jung's view, a lot to do with our shadow material, that part of ourself which we don't want to accept that we have, but we cannot admit to ourselves that we have. So we have violent urges. We cannot admit we have these violent urges. We have ambition. We cannot admit we have ambition. And so what we do is we project those qualities onto someone else, and we then destroy that other person. And in modern culture, I just see so much of this projection. And Shakespeare started in 1599 when he wrote Julius Caesar. Brutus has a soliloquy. Now, a Shakespeare soliloquy always starts, this was a rhetorical device, not just with Shakespeare, but with well-ordered rhetoric in general. Always starts with a question or a proposition. For example, to be or not to be, that is the question. And then it will go maybe redefine the question, get more specific. Like, okay, what does that mean? To be or not to be, that is the question. What does that mean? What it means is whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing it. And then from there, now I'll say, try to break that down further with logic into what does that mean? Okay, that would mean I would die. What would dying mean? That would be just like sleeping. What would sleeping mean? Sleeping would mean dreaming. What would dreaming mean? Oops, there's a problem. What dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause, right? And that's how every speech goes. It has that impeccable critical thinking and logic. Brutus's speech, instead of beginning with a question, begins with a conclusion, an action. His speech says, it must be by his death.
Right.
And for my part, I know no personal cause to spurn at him, but for the general, he would be proud. It must be by his death. And from that conclusion, he then goes through and justifies the conclusion and says, there's really no reason to do this, and the people aren't going to like it, so I'll fashion it thus. that he's not really bad yet, but he will become bad, and therefore, like a serpent's egg, we kill him in the shell. It's absolutely, completely fallacious logic. Makes no sense. And Shakespeare's audience, or at least many of them trained in rhetoric, as they would have been in grammar school, would recognize that. So Brutus wants to do something that logically he cannot he cannot justify. And then when Caesar's ghost comes back to him before the Battle of Philippi after he's been killed, Brutus doesn't recognize him. He says, "Who are you?" And Caesar says, "Thy evil spirit, Brutus." I mean, this is 250 years before we knew about projection. And Caesar says to Brutus, "I am what's inside of you that you want to kill. I'm the evil part of you that you wanted to kill, and so you projected it out on me." When you ask me the question, why do we still care about Caesar? Why do we still care about Shakespeare? Why are we still delving in? That's why, because those insights are deeper, more precise, more human than anything that's being written today. So even though I think there are many wonderful plays being written today, we just don't have a Shakespeare. Something like that happens once, like a Mozart, or maybe once every 5,000 or 6,000 years, or like a Mozart, or a Shakespeare, and so that's what it is. And then if you're like me, what you do is you see that and you say, "Oh, I've got to develop the skills so that I can be a vessel of that, so that I can, if I can read Mozart on the page, then that gives me a hunger, a desire to play it. And then to play it's going to take a hell of a lot of work."
And I think on top of all of that, which is wonderful, I mean, I was talking to my friend Salome the other day. I'll send her this conversation about part of why Shakespeare is so brilliant. I mean, I used To Be or Not to Be as an example, because it's people look at it as like, oh, he's debating life or death, or whether to live or die. It's like, no, it's far, far deeper than that, and way more sophisticated, really, because, like you said, he begins with this question, and it's a fierce, fierce internalized debate that is externalized through the form of soliloquy. And so to sort of view it as a sort of pedestrian, like, is it this or is it that, like, you're not really getting it. And the art of constructing this argument, this is one of the reasons that I wanted, taking it back to Titus Andronicus, that where Aaron is planning the rape of Lavinia. I'm saying, the savagery in and of itself is awful. But it's the logic that he uses to build. It's that the fact that, oh, okay, here's a section of the forest that no one's going to go to. This is what's going to happen tomorrow. Like, it's the cold logic behind it. And when you have, and I mean, I totally agree with what you said. And I try not to be like an old fuddy-duddy, I guess, but I think to myself, who is writing at this sort of level? Not even just psychology or the wisdom or the keen observation of human beings, or the ability to structure a story and a plot. I mean, now there's this strain of people where they say, I'm going to dismiss this entire body of work because I find some of it offensive, or we need to quote unquote decolonize the curriculum. And I'm thinking to myself, well, first off, I mean, people use the term red pill for a variety of reasons. I think mine was sort of innocent in that I'm reading these old plays and realizing, oh my goodness, they're writing about me. It's writing about all of us. And I think if you are in a place where, I mean, I don't love the fact that, for instance, when the four lovers are fighting in Midsummer, I think one of the, it might be Lysander, who refers to, is it Hermia?
Hermia.
As an Ethiop, which is a slur.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to dismiss the entire body of work because of that one word. And I think there's been a loss of transmission of this wisdom, of this brilliance. It's like, you don't have to copy this exactly, but look at the things that was working, that he was doing right, including not writing plays strictly for the nobility, for the groundlings as well. But it's just that's that sort of craftsmanship and structure and ability, not just the depth of understanding. I feel like is lost if you're just saying, oh, it's a dead white man and I have nothing to take away from it. I feel like that's sort of why my feeling is that, you know, these are plays that are hundreds of years old, but is there anything being produced today that will still be doing 10 years from now, let alone 100, you know?
Yeah, I do see some wonderful plays occasionally, but um, the as you say, the use of language in Shakespeare, a line like "to be or not to be," that is the question, is completely untranslatable. It can only exist in the English language in those particular syllables in that way, because the word "be" is this container of meaning. The line doesn't mean to live or not to live. It doesn't mean to kill myself or not to kill myself. It doesn't precisely mean to take action or not to take action, although it means all of those things. And in and Shakespeare keeps coming back to the word "be" in the play. What is it to be? To be human. And if I am, you know, Iago says, "I am not what I am." But to be, to let be. If I just let things be, well, is that the best course of action? Or do I need to engage in the struggle, in the political struggle? Is that my role? And I think Shakespeare asked himself that question a lot, as you know, the events in his time swirled around him in the way events in our time are swirling around us. And what's my role? And do I have to step in? And stepping in, if you're stepping into a real fight, is eventually going to lead to violence. Um, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these kinds of disagreements that are so fundamental that they cannot be, or at least resist um, being resolved by language or words or um, cooperation. And it, it Shakespeare's always boiling it down to that point. If you know, Brutus is saying, do I have to do this? Do I have to kill my friend? Hamlet, do I have to kill my uncle? He's taken the men to the very point of action. Do I have to step into this fight, or do I not? And I think that's a real question for so many people today, and one reason why the plays are more relevant than ever. There are certain arguments in the culture where I think I may be able to stay on the sidelines of this for a while, but my sense of it is eventually one may have to take a side and take whatever the consequences of that are.
So you said so much there. One, I'm so glad that it's so nice when you have someone who, I'm just glad that there's like ocular proof online that there actually are smart actors, because I feel like there's a lot of, you know, it's the stereotype of I mean, we're feeling creatures. That's true. There's also, you know, I feel like this is why I say that to be a great actor, it truly takes a real intelligence. And I think if you're breaking down a piece like To Be or Not to Be, even just that one piece, I mean, there's a whole other play around it. It's right smack dab in the middle of the play. But just even exploring these questions within yourself, I mean, you sort of have, it's sort of, you grow from each of these great parts that you play. And I wonder if that's also sort of being lost. Is, you know, if we're losing people who have, yes, there are wonderful plays, but, you know, are they timeless plays? Do they reach the level of sophistication that these sorts of play and depth that these plays reach? And conversely, if these kinds of plays aren't being written, then, or aren't being written as much, or not being produced, but maybe we'll say that, then does that cheapen, like, do we have actors then correspondingly who never have to stretch themselves in that way, not just as craftspeople, but also just as human beings, and asking themselves these questions about being and existence, and what's on the other side of life, and taking action or not taking action. Um, do we? Is there another loss of transmission of something there where actors then, if they're not called upon to challenge themselves and really improve themselves in a way by working on these really challenging and deep roles, that something is lost? And I feel like, I wonder if audiences can sort of sense that, even if they don't know it consciously. You know what I mean? It's sort of a big concept, but I don't know.
I think that's a great observation that I hadn't ever really put into language for myself before. That the playing Shakespeare trains you to become a better actor. You have to meet that material, and I suppose it's no coincidence that many of the world's great actors, Anthony Hopkins, Judi Dench, Alan Rickman, all of these people were trained and brought up in Shakespeare, and then they can bring that depth of understanding and those skills to whatever role they play. When you're talking about the cancellation of Shakespeare in universities or elsewhere, to me that I can't think of a better example of shooting yourself in the foot. We are so unbelievably fortunate that this philosopher, magician, playwright, poet, all of the above, psychologist, wrote in English. We can read the line "to be or not to be." That is the question. And it can ring around with all of its various meanings, the words meaning all things at once. The Germans can't. If you only speak German, you couldn't read it. If you only speak Italian, you couldn't read it. And we have that ability. This is our heritage as English speakers. And it is one of the great gifts ever given to mankind. And I just can't imagine, Othello's line, the base Indian who threw away a pearl worth all his tribe. He didn't know what he had. And if you throw it away based on some, to my mind, somewhat trivial grievance about a word here or there. First of all, when you, for example, mention Lysander using an objectionable term about Hermia, what we know is that Lysander has some racist qualities. That's all we know. We don't know anything about Shakespeare or anyone else in the play. We know Lysander used a racist epithet at that moment. We know Antonio in The Merchant of Venice is an anti-Semite. That doesn't make Merchant of Venice an anti-Semitic play. It doesn't make Shakespeare an anti-Semite. And those kinds of misunderstandings lead to, oh boy, we lose a lot. We lose a lot.
Well, even, we mentioned this in Titus Andronicus, the character of Aaron the Moor. One of the reasons I loved him so much was that the play was kind of woke in some ways, where he's taking all of this racist language and sort of putting it back and throwing it back in these people's faces. So he's not a victim in that sense. Patrick, I could talk to you all day. The last thing I want to ask you, and maybe it's sort of a heavy question, but I talked to so many people. Just the other day, I texted an old friend that we reconnect. He has another one of those brain waves where I thought of her, and then she had thought of me, and then we ended up messaging each other. And she was like, "Oh my, OMG, millennial, OMG, the industry is a shit show," and this echoes so many of the conversations I've been having behind closed doors, and you see publications like Deadline talking about the contraction. Someone just sent me an article from the LA Times today about all these workers leaving LA because there's no jobs, and I hear things in the theater. So I guess my last question for you is a two-parter, which is, what's the sort of morale like that you're feeling? Maybe a three-parter. What's this morale like, and is that changing? And what in your mind needs to happen in order for the theater industry to really bounce back and really recover, and really in some ways become maybe even relevant again in a way that perhaps it hasn't been recently?
Well, in terms of morale and tone, I can tell you we just went through the awards season here in New York, ending with the Tonys, and there are a number of other awards that lead up to that, and that's a lot of parties, a lot of lunches, and morale was just sky high. Everybody was very happy. The masks are off. People are out smiling. The theater is doing well. Speaking for myself, I think that audiences are more than ready to come back to the theater. The post-pandemic live performance in concerts and wrestling and other live venues is up to pre-pandemic levels. A lot of Broadway is as well. Some of Broadway is as well. The top shows are back to their pre-pandemic levels. I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, which is that the audience, when they come to the theater, they just want to know that they will not be lectured to. They will not be condescended to. The great thing about Shakespeare as a playwright was his humility. This man who was virtually superhuman in his understanding of human nature and in his intelligence. God only knows what his IQ must have been. Nevertheless, begins many of his plays with an apology, with a chorus coming out and saying, "I'm sorry, this isn't going to be good enough." And he ends many of his plays with an epilogue saying, "I'm sorry, I know that wasn't good enough, but we'll make it up to you next time." And that humility I think is something that we can learn from. And remembering, as Shakespeare remembered, that we're servants. The end of Twelfth Night, he says, "We'll strive to serve you every day. We'll strive to please you every day. We'll strive to please you every day." And that what we do is play and maybe not take ourselves quite so seriously, with the understanding that play is very serious business. That every warm-blooded mammal and many that aren't warm-blooded, what they do reliably, both as children and as adults, is play. My dog plays, the cats play, rats play. Why do they play? They play to rehearse situations that they might encounter somewhere. And that's what we do in the theater. I go into King Lear and I say, what might I do in that situation? Othello, what might I do? It's we're testing as a dog tests, how hard can I bite? How hard can I be bitten? How fast can I run? But it's fun. It's play. And play is serious business. If we remember that we're players, that's what Shakespeare called his actors, players. I think that would go a long way to bring the audiences back.
Well, I had a teacher who once said that, who coined the phrase playfully serious and seriously playful. Well, this is This has been Tony Award nominee Patrick Page. So thrilled that you sat down with me. Where can people find you? You're working on your show now. Please plug yourself, promote away, so all of the wonderful
I
people
do a
can
play. Yes, I
see
do a
you.
play about evil, which people might be interested in, and about Shakespeare's discovery of the psychopath and so on. It's called All the Devils Are Here, How Shakespeare Invented the Villain. We'll be at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis in October and November. We'll be at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. in December. I'm also shooting the third season of The Gilded Age on HBO. You can watch seasons 1 and 2. And you can find me online at patrickpageonline.com and at Page Patrick on Instagram.